Mario Kart World has 30 base tracks that all have their own pros and cons, so today I'm going to be ranking all of them based on my opinion alone. If you haven't watched me before, I'm a competitive player currently in the top 40 in the world, so my experience on these tracks is mainly in high level competitive rooms and in time trials. The main thing I value in a Mario Kart track is how fun I find it to drive, along with if there are any cool shortcuts and strategies you can learn. I also take into consideration how fun I find the track to be in the online races I play, but it isn't quite as important to me as the driving itself for this ranking. I don't care all too much about how a track looks, but I will still mention it if I really like the visuals or the theme of a track. Of course, let me know how your rankings would differ from mine in the comments down below. I imagine there'll be many different opinions from you guys watching. Also, if you enjoy the video, could I ask you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel? I upload and live stream regular high level competitive gameplay along with weekly variety videos like this one, so be sure to subscribe if you're interested in any of that. With all that said, let's not waste any more time and get into the ranking. We start the list off with my least favourite track in the game, Peach Beach. Nintendo made a huge change to this track by making each lap different rather than just going around in a circle 3 times like in previous games. In theory, I like this idea because I was never a huge fan of the layout of this track, but somehow I think this version of Peach Beach is actually worse than before. Lap 1 has the regular layout, and all it does is act as a 40-second period for players to decide whether they want to run or bag the track. Lap 2 is the best of the 3 laps with a couple tight turns and a nice shortcut through the boxes, but it is still pretty dull to drive when you're taking the fastest lines. However, it looks like the most exciting section ever if you compare it to lap 3, which is the worst section on any track in the game by a long way. It is practically just 2 insanely long straightaways on water. It's so incredibly boring and it doesn't work well online at all. Of course, power items like golden mushrooms, mega mushrooms and bullet bills are an important factor on every track in the game, but on lap 3 of Peach Beach they are just ridiculous, especially because 80% of the time there will be a shock used that dodges half of the lobby. I've literally never seen a shock happen any earlier than the penultimate item set on this track, so you can always just use a dodge item on lap 3 and half expect to dodge the shock. Then if you have another power item, you can save what feels like a decade over everyone who didn't dodge the shock, since you are just going so much faster on a straightaway than anyone who has been hit by it. Of course, there won't always be a shock, but since it is still quite a long distance between the final item set and the finish line, there can be enough time for people to catch up to the front with strong items anyway. There can be scenarios where people overbag and the runners do succeed, but even if that happens, it still just isn't fun to play, since there are no interesting driving techniques you can do to break away from other players. There aren't even any waves to trick off in the water. That would at least give you something to do other than just look at what items are around you and pray that no shock happens. Even the glider at the start of the lap is just a straightaway where nothing happens. I guess the landing onto the rail is cool, but realistically I'm clutching at straws. So yeah, I don't have a very positive opinion about Peach Beach, but I think it's the only track in the game I actively dislike and don't ever really want to play, so at least that's a good sign of what's to come. In 29th place, I have the other beach track, Koopa Troopa Beach. Now you will notice a pattern in this list that a lot of the tracks that are strongest for bagging are lower down, simply because I prefer tracks where running is a decently viable option over tracks where the shock has a bigger impact on the race or power items can be used to catch up very easily. To be fair, running Koopa Troopa Beach can go well if you play your cards correctly, but it's still nowhere near as reliable as just going for strong items for the first 3 or 4 laps and catching up late on. The shock often completely turns the tables on this track thanks to how short the race is and the shortcuts saving a decent amount of time, especially if you can take multiple at once after dodging. The driving on this track is not too exciting either, to be honest. You are constantly just taking left turns as tight as possible with a couple short straightaways in between, which is still at least 10 times more interesting than Peach Beach in fairness, but I just prefer the driving of most other tracks in the game over this one. The biggest shortcut on this track is great though. Charge jumping through the boxes is really fun to pull off, and it very much helps out the success rate of people who run this track. Overall, I still like playing Koopa Troopa Beach from time to time, but there are just 28 tracks I prefer. Only just above Koopa Troopa Beach though is Choco Mountain, a track with some huge shortcuts that once again make bagging a much more reliable option than running. To be honest, I think running Koopa Troopa Beach is actually slightly more viable than running Choco Mountain, but it is close. But Choco Mountain has more interesting driving techniques that gets it one spot higher in the list. There is a shroomless shortcut immediately on the first turn, and there is a very cool charge jump in the middle of the track as well, making the track fun to drive if you learn it properly. However, it's still low on the list once again thanks to how strong bagging is as a strategy. There will always be people dodging the shock on this track, and thanks to how much off-road there is, especially on the biggest turn on the track, people can catch up to the front spots very quickly. It is fun to take the shortcuts here, to be fair. Whenever I have a golden mushroom or mega mushroom on this track, I do enjoy using it since it just feels like you're going so much faster than everyone else, but it is a bit too overpowered. A track with a similar problem is next up in the list, which is Desert Hills. Once again, it's a bit too broken to have good items on this track with how big the shortcuts are. However, there have been some cool discoveries that make the driving quite fun. The charge jump into the pole is a nice alternative if you don't have a mushroom, then of course the final shortcut is an important thing to learn to keep your lead in first. These strategies do make this track the most viable and enjoyable to run in the video so far, but it still doesn't have a great layout in my view. The turns at the end specifically I'm not a huge fan of. It saves a bit too much time to shroom through the off-road. It would be a lot more interesting if Nintendo kept the big hills at the end, because then the fastest strategy would likely be more complicated than just driving as far on the right side as possible. I tell you what, for a track called Desert Hills, there aren't many hills anyway. There is just that bumpy section after the second item set, but they're hardly hills, they may as well be mounds. Next up in 26th is DK Spaceport, a track with a really cool concept that I think hasn't been executed all too well. Each layer having different obstacles and routes is nice, but they aren't really all that interesting to be honest. One of them is just bouncing on 4 bounce pads, on another you trick left and right on rails. It's hardly the most complicated driving, but I guess every layer being a complete straightaway does have its limits. This track is also a bit of a weird one to play online. There is an off-road shortcut on every turn, so there's always an opportunity to catch up to the front spots, and the shock always has a big impact on the outcome of a race, typically happening after one of the final 2 item sets. This is the same sort of issue as the other tracks in the video so far, but for some reason I just enjoy races on this track a slight bit more, and I simply think it looks pretty cool. I mean, there is a massive mechanical decay at the end of the track, so that must count for something. The next track in the list is the most overplayed track in the game, at least when it comes to high level rooms, Mario Circuit. I like the idea of combining 3 of the Mario Circuit tracks into one, but leaving out Mario Circuit 4 is a shame. This track is the shortest one in the game, so adding Mario Circuit 4 wouldn't have even caused any issues with the length of it. As it is though, it is a very simple track to drive for the most part, but there are a few cool charge jump shortcuts sprinkled in there. Playing it online is incredibly repetitive. There will always be a few people that drive normally from the start, but the majority of the room will just stop at the first item set to get strong items, then take the big shortcut at the start of lap 2 to catch back up to the front. There is also a shock used about 75% of the time on this track that half the room dodges. Each race is so predictable, so I'm just never that excited to play it. Out of the tracks so far though, I do think it's the most fun to play in time trials. It feels quite smooth to drive with a couple tricky strategies you can implement to save a bit of time as well. Although, it is the only track so far that uses a combo I actually enjoy driving with, so that does help out. The next track in the list I have a bit of an agenda against, to be honest, because I just really don't like the driving of Toad's Factory. There are a few things that don't work for me on this track compared to its previous version on Mario Kart Wii. The Travelator turn before the final item set is horrible to deal with when you're surrounded by other players. It is almost impossible to take the fastest line when you're getting bumped around, and it can slow you down so much if the red Travelator is on the inside. I think it's a bit too punishing. If you're not near anyone in first, and I actually quite like how difficult this turn can be to drive perfectly, but more often than not, you'll be having to deal with items being thrown around all over the place and bullet bills cancelling your drift. It's an absolute nightmare. The final straightaway is a mess as well. The mud is way too punishing if you get hit, and the moving tractors covering the boost panels are just not fun to deal with either. The shortcut using the cranes on the final turn is fun to be fair, but I wish they didn't change the water pool on the right into off-road, because it makes using a mushroom on the final turn the best place on the track, which just makes the crane shortcut useless in time trials. I also think this track is another one too impacted by shocks in online races. You will often see people stopping at the first item set on lap 3 for the sole purpose of getting a dodge item, since it can save so much time over other players if they get hit by a shock after one of the final 2 item sets. It is probably the most runnable of the tracks so far in the list though. The chaos that happens in the mid-pack can allow a few players to get a breakaway in the front. Despite that though, I still think this track is nowhere near as fun to play as it was in Mario Kart Wii, putting it quite low on the list. Now the next track might come as a surprise to some since it's such a crazy track visually, but the main thing I value in a track, as I said, is how fun I find it to play. And I'm at the point now where I don't enjoy playing Rainbow Road all that much. It just drags on whenever I play it now. The spectacle has worn off for me. Don't get me wrong, it's an unreal track to look at and the experience the first few times is amazing, but the more you play it, the more you don't look forward to it the next time. The first 2 laps practically don't matter. You just need to get your coins as high as possible and try and either get into a decent spot for the start of lap 3 or have a dodge item to use at the item set after the cannon. The wait for lap 3 and 4 isn't even worth it either. The driving is not interesting at all other than the big shortcut at the end, which does save the track to some extent from being even lower in the list because it's one of the coolest shortcuts in the game. The gap jump at the end of lap 2 is a nice shortcut as well, but the length of the track just means it doesn't matter that much in races. Seeing these sorts of shortcuts be done in world records is cool, but it doesn't make me want to play the track myself. To be honest, I would probably prefer playing most of the tracks I've already mentioned in the video in time trials over this one, and even online this track might be less fun than a track like Toad's Factory, but I do still appreciate that it looks insane and the first few playthroughs were amazing, so I couldn't warrant putting it any lower on the list. In 22nd place, I have Peach Stadium, a track that I think might be the least commonly played in high level rooms, and I guess that's because it's quite a basic track with only one significant shortcut at the very start. However, I actually think it's a decently fun track to drive, especially the section between the second and third item sets, where you can do a couple of edge tricks and there's a U-turn where the fastest strategy is to wall bonk as you release a super mini turbo. There are also a couple of crazy strategies in time trials, the main one being the wall ride at the U-turn that just looks ridiculous. I find this map pretty fun online too. The only real flaw for me is that the first shortcut saves a bit too much time, so getting mushrooms at the start is quite broken. You can do a small charge jump shortcut into the pipe on the left if you don't have a mushroom though, so it isn't completely unviable to keep your lead in the front on lap 2 or 3. The problem of shocks being too powerful is not as present on this track either, which is the case for most of the tracks in the rest of the video now. I will say that if you aren't doing the insanely difficult strategies on this track, then it is one of the more boring ones to play in time trials, but it makes for decent races online, so it isn't too big of an issue. Moo Moo Meadows is a track I was a big fan of when the game first came out, with the tree bounce cut being the obvious highlight of the track compared to its previous versions. However, as time has gone on, I have been enjoying the races less and less on this track. I don't really know why either. My guess would be because people have become better at bagging the track, so it's become the more reliable strategy, making me like it less, but I'm not completely sure. The driving on this track is not too bad though. There are a couple of interesting shortcuts outside of the tree bounce, like the cow bouncers and the wall ride on the final turn. And this is one of the few tracks where snaking is done, which is cool as well. Despite that though, I've never been a fan of time trialing this track either, partly because the optimal combo is once again high speed and clunky, and partly because the strategy at the start is just really annoying to attempt over and over again. The next track in the list is kind of the opposite of Moo Moo Meadows in a way, because when the game first came out I really did not like Drybone's Burnout, but I'm slowly starting to enjoy playing it more and more as time goes on. But not enough to get it any higher than 20th in the list at the moment. The thing is, this track is one of the best visually and thematically in the game for me, and the driving is pretty nice as well, especially at the end with the multiple different lines you can take across the lava pits. But I have one big problem with this track that has been ruining it online for me, which is the placement of the final item box. The distance between the final item set and the finish line is too far in my opinion, and since the ending is so much faster when you have power items, it would pretty much guarantee that whoever dodged the shock will win the race. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the distance was actually longer on a couple other tracks than on Drybone's Burnout, but the ending being full of shortcuts that save a lot of time just makes it more noticeable for me. As I say though, my opinion on this track is becoming more positive as time goes on, because I think this is becoming less of an issue in races I play, likely because people are getting better at driving the track, so front running is a stronger strategy. It could definitely go up further in the list in the future for sure. I like driving it in time trials and it looks really cool. Wario Shipyard is next up, and this one I'm still not sure how much I like it to be honest. The water in this game is a bit dodgy, so you'd think I wouldn't enjoy driving this track, but the shortcuts you can do here let you avoid most of the water, and they are very fun to pull off. The palm tree shortcut at the start gets you all the way to the boost ramp, then the charge jump onto the rail followed by the off-road cut after the second item set gets you past even more water. The ending as well onto the 2 rails is really cool. The only part of the track I actually don't enjoy driving is the big water turn between the first 2 shortcuts. For online racers, this track works pretty well to be fair. It is possible to get big breakaways if you drive it really well. The ending is always entertaining thanks to the final wall ride strategy at the finish line. The shock isn't insanely strong for the most part without taking away from the value of being in the bottom spots, so overall it's a pretty good track online. Time trialing this track isn't ideal in my opinion though, but again I just don't enjoy using heavy high speed combos, so I'm naturally not going to enjoy it as much as others that use more acceleration and handling based combos. Now I said for Drybone's Burnout that my opinion of the track has become more positive recently, but the next track in the list has grown on me way more than that one. Starview Peak was my least favourite track in the game when it first came out. I really did not like how wide the track was, and I found the water section so annoying to drive with how slow you go, which to be fair is still the case. I don't understand why it doesn't work the same way as the fast sections on Bowser's Castle and Rainbow Road. However, I do now like that the side of the water section acts kind of like a tightrope. It takes precision to avoid driving back into the water or off the track entirely, and surprisingly, it doesn't feel like it gets too cramped when you're in the pack. The driving of the track in general I enjoy a lot more than I expected to as well. The charge jump shortcut onto the rail is really fun. I like the double ultra mini turbo strategy before the first glider. Even the charge jump after the first turn is pretty nice. I'm not a huge fan of the glider at the end. Having to swerve to each of the boost rings with this game's glider controls isn't fun. I guess that isn't completely the track's fault, but it is going to have to hold that anyway. The main problem I have online with this track is that the bullet bill is actually tragic. It is so incredibly slow in the entire water section, it is a hindrance to pull it. I failed to mention it, but this is also the case for the ending of Rainbow Road. I don't get how that oversight could be made for multiple tracks. I must say though, I think the shock is really well balanced on this track. You get to accelerate really quickly if it hits you whilst you're on the side of the road, but you can still use an efficient shock if you play your cards right. I haven't even mentioned how crazy the world records have got on this track with the ridiculous shroomless wall ride shortcut. One of the most epic looking strats in the game. So yeah, overall Starview Peak has gone way up in my list since the release of the game, but it still only gets into the 18th spot, showing how much I like the tracks in this game on the whole. The next one is one of the simplest tracks in terms of layout and driving, but I think it just makes for some good races online, and there are a few little driving tricks I enjoy doing. Boo Cinema only really has one shortcut at the very start, which to be fair gets very interesting at world record level, since you can do a wall ride onto the rail on the right instead of just going through the off-road like normal. Outside of that though, there are a couple of edge tricks you can do before each of the second and third item sets, and of course the wall ride into the finish line pole is a cool strat as well. All these strategies quite simply make me enjoy driving the track in races. It's a very runnable track as well thanks to the lack of big shortcuts. The ending is often a bit too chaotic on the final turn to be fair, but outside of that there isn't anything that can get frustrating at all. The film reel spinning in different directions each lap is nice. It makes the track more dynamic, having to take different lines every time. Theming wise, this is definitely one of the best tracks in the game as well. Driving into the screen at a haunted cinema is one of the more unique concepts in the game for sure. Dandelion Depths is my next track in the list, another fairly simple track in the grand scheme of things, but once again I just like playing this track online. This is definitely more shock orientated than Boo Cinema, but sometimes that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It feels to me like you can hold a lead on this track if you play it well, but equally there is opportunity to catch up if you end up in the back of the pack for the majority of the track, except maybe the very ending on lap 3 thanks to how big the shortcut on the final turn is. I don't think having a big shortcut at the end of a track is too big of an issue. It just changes the goal from solely being in the front of the pack by the end of the race to having a mushroom in as high a spot as possible at the end of the race. The whole track is a nice width as well. It feels like one of the tracks most designed with 24 players in mind. The driving in the water section is really fun by the way. Getting constant tricks between the rocks and the water is satisfying to pull off. The big turn at the start is pretty cool as well. You can risk going really tight with your mini turbo tricks to save time over your opponents, and of course when you have a bullet bill it can extend the entire way. Bullet bill drop-offs in general are kinda in this game, but this one is incredibly generous. It just refuses to put you in the middle of a turn, which of course is very helpful if a shock is in play. Now we head into the top half of the list. In 15th place I have Cheap Falls. This one is absolutely filled with cool shortcuts that save a monstrous amount of time if you can do them more consistently. You can skip the first turn by driving through the off-road and climbing the wall of the straightaway, but the other shortcuts are more significant. The ending shortcut with the mushroom saves a lot of time, but you can also do it without a mushroom by charge jumping into the pole and over the boxes in the off-road, which does look pretty cool, but it doesn't at all compare to the Tarzan shortcut. Instead of taking the normal route where the second item set is, instead you can hang on to the left side of the cliff by a thread and then use the trees to trick all the way over the water onto the top of the shortcut turn. You can also get here by getting a high charge jump from the regular path, which doesn't save as much time as the Tarzan, but it still serves a purpose in races. Typically a track having this many shortcuts would get it higher in the list, but I don't find the driving everywhere else to be much fun, and I don't enjoy it online as much as many others at the moment. You can definitely get big breakaways if you can do all the shortcuts on lap 1, but if you don't, then you end up getting stuck in the pack, which on this track I find quite annoying to deal with. The second half of the track especially can get incredibly chaotic with all the boomerangs, triple items, stars, mega mushrooms and whatever else being spammed after the second item set. This happens because mushrooms are so valuable towards the end of each lap, so people want to get rid of their other items to allow themselves to go through the off-road cuts. The shock is also a bit too strong in this track, I think. If you get shocked before either of the two off-road shortcuts, then you will lose a ridiculous amount of time. So since I have several problems with this track online, I decided to place it directly in the middle of the list. The shortcuts you can do carry this track in my mind. Crown City is a weird one for me, because it's a track I was a huge fan of a few months ago, but I've been slowly liking it less and less as time has gone on, but I would still have it in the top half of the tracks. The first section has a big shortcut that you kind of need to take in order to get into the front, which isn't my favourite way for a track to start in fairness, since having to rely on pulling mushrooms almost immediately isn't ideal. Outside of that though, the first section is fine, there isn't really anything special going on. The second section is really cool. I find driving on the rooftops with some rails and boost ramps very fun to do, and going directly through the whole of the trophy is a nice detail as well. The highlight though is the ending glider, because the fastest way to drive this is to land on the sign on the left, then trick onto the wall, then trick off the ramp into a tree, then charge jump as soon as you land into the finish pole. This sequence is a lot more interesting than just gliding in a straight line, and it saves a decent amount of time, so it is worth learning. The final section is the most important one online, thanks to the two back-to-back grass shortcuts. They save so much time if you can take them both, so carrying mushrooms to the front will often pay off massively. You can do the two shortcuts without any items, but it is very difficult and will still lose quite a bit of time to those who have mushrooms. Also, if a shock is used here, then whoever dodges it will be laughing, since they will be the only ones getting this huge time gain. Driving wise though, I do really like doing these shortcuts with or without mushrooms, including my favourite feather shortcut in the game that gets over both the shortcuts at once. The final shortcut is quite precise to do. You need to avoid tricking into the pole, otherwise you will go a lot slower over the grass. This isn't a problem though, a bit of challenge on a final shortcut is fine by me. I do think the finish line is a bit too far away though. The ending can be a mess of every item in existence being thrown around. Overall, I really like the general driving of Crown City, but online races aren't quite as enjoyable for me as they used to be, dropping it to 14th in the list. In 13th, we have a track that has always been in contention for my top 5 favourite tracks of all time, but in this game, Dino Jungle doesn't hit the same. I still like it, hence why it's not lower on the list, but I really don't like the changes they made to the ending. I have never played Double Dash, so I can't make fair comparisons with that game's version of the track, but in Mario Kart 7, it was instead a glider over a big void that had a small patch of off-road beforehand. This acted as a mushroom shortcut like in Mario Kart World, but you could use a super mini turbo to get through the off-road, and it was still quite a bit faster than going around the turn normally. But that is not the case in this game. Going through the shortcut without any item is practically identical to going around, and it saves so much time to mushroom through it, which results in the entire race completely depending on who can take this shortcut. This makes running the track a lot less viable, and of course it can result in the shock being overpowered if many people lose their mushrooms and are forced to go around. The other main problem is that you can't do the shortcut over the final turn in this game either. There is no glider anymore to get the height to cut off the U-turn. Even if you have a feather to get the height, Lakitu decides he's having none of it and picks you up anyway. It's a real shame this shortcut wasn't embraced by Nintendo when bringing the track back. Despite its flaws though, I do still enjoy playing it. The driving is quite fun. The split path section having two worthy options rather than one being much faster than the others is good for variety, and the interactions with the dinosaurs are quite interesting and unique. So it isn't all bad for Dino Jungle. It was always going to be a fun track for me in this game, but just hasn't totally lived up to my expectations. Next up, I've put Mario Bros Circuit, a track I didn't really like early on, but since learning the driving strategies, it's become a lot more fun to play. Since it's the first track in the game, it has quite a simple layout, but there are quite a lot of techniques that make it more interesting than it looks at first glance. Immediately there's a shortcut where you charge jump into a sign and bounce onto the rail on the inside of the first turn, which you can do on all 3 laps thanks to the sign respawning. Then you can do a fun trick sequence on the bridge section with a switch between the right and the left rail, which is much better than just taking the turns regularly. The ending split path is cool as well. The right path being faster if you don't have any items, and the left path being faster if you have a mushroom to do the charge jump cut into the boxes. Even the really long turn before the ending is fun to drive, since you can risk doing a couple of edge tricks to go as fast as possible if you're feeling confident. So even though the track is simple on paper, there isn't any part of it that feels dull to drive. Online, this track is fairly balanced as well. If you have clean driving, you can gain a nice lead, especially if you use mushrooms to your advantage early on. Bagging can definitely be effective if you play your cards right with your dodge items. However, I often notice that the track rewards the people who play in the front the whole race more than the people in the back the whole race, which I like a lot. The track just missing out on the top 10 is Sky High Sunday, and the general consensus seems to be that this track has been significantly upgraded from the Mario Kart Deluxe version, and I totally agree. The new mechanics are used incredibly well here. The rails make the track more interesting in the first half, especially the optional path next to the glider actually being faster to take. The wall ride at the end is the best new feature though. Being able to cut off the entire turn by tricking off the wall constantly is class. You are almost always doing tricks on this track with how many ramps there are throughout it, which I find a lot of fun. Online, this one works really well too. The off-road shortcut at the start lets anyone who pulls a mushroom from the first item set get straight into the front, with the rest of the track serving as a really good runner. It is essential you survive the final turn on each lap, so managing your items to keep yourself as protected as possible is important for you to succeed in races on this track. As always, it is possible to catch up if you're in the back, since you can save a lot of time if you use your power items correctly, such as using a golden in the middle of the glider to last until the end of the first turn, or using a bullet bill on the final turn, which is a bit broken to be fair. It's so much faster than the wall ride. Despite that though, I still think being closer to the front of the pack produces more consistent results, making me enjoy playing the track more than most bagging oriented tracks. Now, kicking off my top 10 favourite tracks in Mario Kart World, we have Salty Speedway. This track is basically just 2 different split paths in each half of the track. The first half where you can either stay on the bottom or you can jump off the waterfall to get onto the faster top path, and the second half where you can take the regular path through the water at the bottom, or you can go up top to take the glider path instead. The good thing about this is that none of these paths are useless in online races. Of course, if you're just driving as fast as possible, then you'll take the top path shortcut at the start, then stay at the bottom for the end. But sometimes you want to take different lines in certain situations. The bottom path at the start is helpful for when you're bagging, or when you're using a speed item like a golden or a mega mushroom. It also acts as a backup path in case people around you have aggressive items when going for the shortcut. Then the glider path in the second half of the track is a lot safer than the regular route, mainly because getting hit by a shock is a lot less impactful when you're on a glider compared to when you're on the water. The only problem I have with this track is that the ending shortcut is a bit too cramped. If you are not in the front of the pack, then you'll be dealing with triple items, boomerangs, mega mushrooms, and whatever else on a very thin ledge, which is a bit too crazy in my opinion. However, the glider path can be used to work around this issue, because if you have a mushroom, you can get onto the rail on the inside of the turn, letting you avoid most of the items being used on the regular shortcut. Running this track is also very viable online. You can gain a lot of time with clean driving, and you can take the final shortcut with a green shell, feather, or super horn if you're in first at the end of a lap. In 9th place, we have Faraway Oasis, a track that is really fun to drive in general and has some crazy shortcuts, but it does have a couple of issues for online play. The ending of the track is a really bad spot to get hit by a shock, mainly because the ending shortcut saves a lot of time, so if you don't have a mushroom to take it, then anyone in close proximity can overtake you. It's also bad because the waterfall current drags you towards the edge of the road, so you can easily get shocked off the track when taking the tightest line. And it's a bit harder to swerve out of the way of any mega mushrooms or bullet bills or even any shells and bananas on the ground in this section. Furthermore, for some reason this track feels incredibly punishing to get hit by a blue shell on, so being in first place is often not optimal unless you carry mushrooms up or pull a super horn. That's the end of the problems I have with this track though, because the driving on this track is some of the most fun in the game for me. On the long turn at the start, you can do an edge trick to save a small amount of time. It isn't too difficult, but of course there is a risk you fail miserably. The rail section afterwards is the main highlight, tricking on and off the sign on the left, then diving into the water to bounce onto the next rail, then using that rail to get onto the wooden path above the water is a really fun sequence. The world record strategy here is something else though. You can trick off the rail early into one of the poles, dive into the water, then get a ridiculously high trick to get over the boxes and clear the entire off-road. It is actually viable to do online as well with a bit of practice, and even though I don't go for it myself, I still appreciate how cool it looks. As I said, the final shortcut is a bit broken on this track, but you can actually do it without mushrooms if you charge jump into the left side of the boxes, or you can just play it safe and do a super mini turbo through the off-road to the right of the boxes. It's still faster than going around. The charge jump method is a bit dodgy, but the whole track is kind of dodgy in general, so it fits right in. But jankiness isn't always a bad thing in my eyes, so I like it. I should say I really do like the theme of this track. Whilst an oasis is a fairly simple concept, sometimes the most simple concepts are the best ones. Although I do wish the animals were a bit more involved in the track. Moo Moo Meadows has several different cow bouncers. How come I can't bounce off an elephant or use a giraffe's neck as a railing? In 8th place, I've put Wario Stadium, a track that has shortcuts all over the place that feel incredibly rewarding to pull off. The rail on the left at the start of the track lets you cut off the first turn, then you can immediately get onto the rail on the right of the next straightaway. After doing many tricks on this rail, you can then do a huge jump through the air to the next rail, where you can then do another couple of tricks and then land past the second item set. There is an even bigger shortcut after the ramps though, which might be the most unique shortcut in the game. If you charge jump onto the wall on the right, it is possible to climb all the way up to the rail at the top, letting you take the turn tighter than you can on the ground. What makes it so unique is that it's almost essential you grab the coin when you are doing this charge jump, since it gives you a small boost. If you don't get this boost, then it's very unlikely you will make it to the rail before you detach from the wall. This is a really cool mechanic, and it is a good method to get a breakaway from people when you're in the front, because people in the pack will be taking the coin from each other, preventing anyone from making the shortcut. After the turn, you can also do a charge jump over the big ramp to save a little bit of time as well. All these shortcuts and strategies make this track so much fun to drive, and it is one of the strongest runners in the game too, despite the off-road shortcut at the end saving quite a lot of time. Now in 7th place, I have put Acorn Heights, a track that is maybe my favourite in terms of aesthetic. I love how this track looks. When I first saw it, I immediately compared it to Falling Forest in Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, and of course anything that resembles Skylanders in any way I'm going to be a fan of. Whilst I'm not as good at driving this track compared to other tracks in my top 10, I still think it's really fun to play, especially when you're taking the fastest lines possible. The long turn at the start is fairly simple, but then you can combine a charge jump onto the rail with the right trick on the rail to get a big jump onto the glider ramp, saving a bit of time. After the glider though is when the track gets more interesting, because there are rail sections that I like just as much as the rails on Wario Stadium. After you land from the glider, there is a rail on the left that you take every time, because you can use it to take the shortcut on the next turn without needing any items. The world record strategy is to trick from the first rail onto the second rail, then trick into the wall on the left, then detach from the wall so you can trick off the pole, then land on the wall of the shortcut to get past all the off-road. This sequence alone is unreal, but it's one of probably 6 or 7 different methods to take this shortcut, some being faster than others and some being safer than others, so you will see different methods being used by different players in online races, adding a nice bit of variety to the track. The ending is even more rail based, since you have to jump across 3 different vines when driving as fast as possible, unless you have a mushroom to do the gap cut and land between the signs, which is cool in and of itself. In fairness, this ending can get a bit chaotic online, especially if a shock happens late on and everyone fights to get onto the rails. The only other problem with this track online for me is that it's a bit random whether you'll survive the first turn on lap 1, because it solely relies on whether someone pulls a trail or triple items next to you or not, which can be annoying if you just want to try and get a breakaway early on. Otherwise though, I think the track is great online. The shock isn't as strong as you'd expect most of the time. Getting a big breakaway is more than possible if you can survive lap 1 in the front or pull mushrooms early on, and as I say, I have a lot of fun driving it every time it's picked. Now, the top 6 tracks in the game for me, I knew were my favourite 6 before I started making the list thanks to how much fun they are to drive, but I did have to take some consideration for the order. It will likely constantly change for me as I play the game more, but for now my 6th favourite track in the game is Shy Guy Bazaar. This track has shortcuts and different routes everywhere. It is constant action. In the first second of the race, you have to decide if you want to stay safe and drive on the road, or if you want to risk jumping onto the rail on the right to get an early lead. If you manage to get onto the rail, then you have another choice, because you can either trick onto the road on the top and drive regularly, or you can go for the biggest but most difficult shortcut on the track. You can detach from the right wall to land on the red rail, then immediately trick off that onto another rail below. After the subsequent ramp, you can then charge jump onto the top of the wall of the S-bend, letting you skip the turn. This is quite precise, but with practice you can get pretty consistent at it. You can also go for the shortcut if you didn't go to the right at the very start as well, so it isn't exclusive to the top path. Of course, you can instead just drive regularly on the bottom path, but that still isn't the end of the options here. There is a rail going directly across the 2 sides of the road before the S-bend that you can get onto if you do a charge jump into one of the poles in the middle of the track, letting you get an uncontested item box. You can also get here by charge jumping much earlier on the left and just staying on the rails, which is the method I do on lap 1 of every race on this track. It's a lot of fun and it works pretty well to stay in the front. After this section, of course, we have the S-bend itself. Then you have the straightaway before the glider with the rails on the left side. These rails are faster to take, but they come with the risk of getting hit or bumped off the track in a close pack. The final turn has a simple off-road shortcut to take at the end, which does save a bit of time, but you can easily hold a top spot if you don't have any mushrooms at the end of the race. At the end of each lap, of course, you have the same decision to make as the start of lap 1. This time you will have more space from other players, but there could be unavoidable items around you. You are always making choices during races on this track. Many different paths are useful in situations, there are several shortcuts you can take throughout, and the general driving is just really fun. It's a great track on the whole. Now, getting into the top 5, we have a track with 2 of the best shortcuts in the game, Whistle Stop Summit. The gap cut in the cave section and the crazy ending shortcut are so much fun to pull off, and they make getting big breakaways more possible on this track than any other track in the game. Neither of them are incredibly difficult to do. The gap cut you can get 100% consistently after a while, and while the ending shortcut doesn't work every time, you can still rely on it if you put in enough practice, which is definitely worth it thanks to how much time it saves over going around on the bottom. As a result, this track is such a good one to run online. If you land every shortcut without getting hit early on, you can get such a big lead over the bottom spots really quickly. Of course, this track is the most rail heavy track in the game, making the driving fairly unique. Constantly switching between rails to take the fastest lines and get as many trick boosts as possible is really fun, and the way items like shells and boomerangs work on rails adds an interesting dynamic to online races. Normally a projectile item will just go in a straight line, but when you're on a rail it will instead grind the rail itself. I like this because it allows you to know exactly where an item is going to be thrown, making it a bit easier to dodge them. I should mention that I do absolutely hate how bad the first 2 seconds of this track are in time trials. It is so obnoxious to get onto the left path from where you start a time trial from, so you have to do quite a lot of instant restarting if you're going for a good time. This one issue doesn't take away from the rest of the track though. It is really unique and enjoyable to drive, and there is never a boring race on it. From one track with huge shortcuts to another, in 4th place we have this game's rendition of Bowser's Castle. Once again, there are 2 shortcuts that save a lot of time here, the one at the start being one of the biggest in the game. It is essential to learn the gap cut if you want to win races on this track, and you have multiple ways to go about it. You can do a direct charge jump from the bottom, which isn't too hard but definitely the riskiest method of the main 3. The easiest method is to charge jump onto the rail early on, then trick onto the right wall and into the arrows to get more than enough height. But you can meet in the middle by charge jumping onto this right wall from the bottom instead. All 3 of these methods are online viable, giving the track some variety within the first 10 seconds. The other shortcut after the cannon glider is even more epic looking. Being able to get so much height on the inside of the turn is really cool. There is a 3rd shortcut the world records do immediately after this, and it's even more absurd, adding to this track's plethora of insane strategies. The rest of the driving on this track is fairly standard. In fact, I would probably prefer the driving of the previous 2 tracks tracks on the whole more than Bowser's Castle. However, this one ranks higher because it is the #1 track in the game for me in terms of how little I think about the shock during online races. This might just be me, but it feels like the shock is less impactful to races on this track than any other in the game, despite there being a few obvious shock spots like before the first shortcut or during the second shortcut. I never voluntarily go for a shock dodge on this track. I find having a complete running mindset to work most of the time once the start of the race has been played out. On the majority of other tracks I will try and get dodge items if I get hit out in the front spots early on, but here I pretty much never stop trying to drive as fast as possible. It kind of brings me back to a lot of tracks on 200cc in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, just driving and using items to your advantage without thinking about the shock. It's great fun. So yeah, overall this track is great if you want big shortcuts and it's one of the best runners in the game, but it just about misses out on the top 3. Instead, my third favourite track in the game is Airship Fortress, and this has been the case for quite a while now. My top 3 are tracks I pick all the time in competitive play, thanks to them being the most fun to drive for me in the entire game. Airship Fortress is actually a track I thought was overrated before the game came out, but in this game I think it's class. I initially thought the lack of shortcuts would be a bad thing for the track, but in hindsight I was very wrong. This track is one of the strongest runners in the game as a result. The final turn is the only patch of off-road on the whole track, so you won't lose much time if you don't have any mushrooms in the front spots. As I say, I love driving this track. There is a nice mix of regular driving and rail techniques, all of which is fun to do. You immediately have a rail to get onto at the start of the track, switching sides on the first turn whilst constantly tricking to gain speed. Then you jump off the chain and land on the red rail, where you can do a right trick to wrap around the turn. This trick will always work if you land late on the red rail, because you need your trick boost to still be active when you do the right trick, which is a good thing to know when running this track. Afterwards, you enter the indoor section of the track, which has a U-turn where the fastest strategy is to get a wall bang as you release your Super Mini Turbo, similarly to the turn I described earlier on Peach Stadium. Then you have a short straightaway section that isn't boring to drive, because you can get 4 different tricks when driving as fast as possible. The moving fire pillars can be tricky to avoid, but if you know what you're doing, you can always work around them without much trouble. After that, there is the cannon glider that leads to the final spiral, which is another spot where a wall bang is the fastest way to take the turn. In fact, it's actually faster to get 2 of them thanks to how long the turn is. It's a very unique section to drive. The ending shortcut is really fun as well if you have a mushroom, since you can charge jump onto the rail instead of just drifting through the off-road. As I said, this track is a great runner online, but it isn't too hard to catch up if you play your cards right. Since the start of the track is rail based, not everyone will be able to take the fastest lines, and people will be trying to hit others off the rail so they can drive as fast as possible. So avoiding items on this track is very valuable for catching up. This track also has one of the biggest bullet bill extensions in the game, as you can use your bill before the cannon glider and it can last until past the ending spiral. In fairness, the ending of the track can be a bit too chaotic on lap 3, but it isn't obnoxious enough for me to place the track any lower than 3rd. The track is just great in every other aspect. Just ahead in 2nd place, I have DK Pass, once again thanks to how much fun it is to drive. Early on in the game, I actually didn't think this track was all that special, but the shortcuts that have been found shot it all the way to 2nd in the list. The wall ride at the start is much more interesting than taking the turn regularly, although there is a smaller shortcut using the pole if you want to play it safe, which is still pretty cool. The other big shortcut here happens straight after the 2nd item set, as you can do a double tree bounce on the left side to skip all the off-road. This shortcut is just class. Getting it perfectly is so satisfying as it sets you up perfectly for the small off-road cut on the next turn. The final shortcut is also quite clean. Your mushroom boost lasts just long enough for you to get past all the off-road, letting you release an ultra mini turbo going into the next lap. It does make having mushrooms pretty important for online races, since you do lose quite a bit of time if you have to go around, so I would actually say I prefer the way tracks like Airship Fortress and Bowser's Castle play online than DK Pass, but I equally think that the general driving of this track is more fun than both of those tracks, getting it higher on the list. There is another wall ride I haven't mentioned after the first one that is class as well. The track is just filled with strategies I enjoy to pull off every time I play it online. There's not much else I can really say about it, so let's move on to the number 1 spot. If you have ever watched me play the game, then you'll probably know by now that Great Question Block Ruins is my favourite track in the game and has been since day 1. Admittedly, I am biased because it is by far the track I'm best at driving, and it is the only track I got any world records on in time trials, but for me I still have the most fun on this track out of any track in the game, so it takes the number 1 spot in the list. The shortcut at the start saves an astronomical amount of time compared to going around, making it even more essential to have mushrooms on this track than DK Pass. As a result, I can understand why someone wouldn't like to play this track online, but I still enjoy trying to carry mushrooms up to the front as a strategy, so it isn't a problem in my eyes. Doing the shortcut fast is actually pretty difficult, as you have to go as close to the wall as possible without actually seeing it due to the boxes blocking your view. I love this shortcut simply because I'm consistent at it. I often overtake people here without any problem. After the cut, you have a simple rail turn, but the optimal strategy to detach from the rail is a nice trick you can do to save a small amount of time. The wall ride shortcut straight after is one of the most difficult strategies in the game. It actually makes time trialing the track a bit more annoying in a similar way to the beginning of Whistle Stop Summit, but at least this shortcut looks insane and is incredibly satisfying when you properly get it. Of course, online you will just take the turn normally, leading to the shortcut filled second half of the track. After bouncing off the cloud, you have 4 different options, 2 of which are used when time trialing the track, with the other 2 being legitimate options online if you're playing it safe. On lap 1 in time trials, you jump onto the chain on the left to get coins, then on lap 2 and 3 you jump on the right rail for the fastest line, where you do 2 tricks then use the pole to get close to the edge, setting you up to do the crazy ending sequence. The other 2 options are to just go on the road in the middle, or to bounce off the second cloud on the left and trick towards the platform before the pole, serving as a safer version of the regular pole route. Of course, the ending sequence is the main highlight of the track. You are doing tricks and wall rides over the void for a few seconds, then either landing on the road or going for the box cut, one of my favourite shortcuts in the game. I will say, the glider at the end being so long is a bit strange, since you are basically just doing nothing for a few seconds unless there are items to use and avoid in a race. That's the only issue I have with the track in terms of the layout though, and of course the amount of tricks and techniques you do on every other part of the track more than makes up for the glider being too long. It is one of the most unique tracks in the game for sure, and of course the fact that it's my best track lets me enjoy playing it online every time, enough for it to remain as the number 1 in my list since the game was released. And that concludes my ranking. As I said at the start, let me know what changes you would make to the list, and once again leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. If there are any other videos like this you'd want to see, then I'd love to know in the comments down below. For now though, thanks for watching, I'll see you at some point in the future.